In the past few months, local models have gotten incredibly good and relatively easy to run. So much so that you can now use them for full local coding. That means you don't need an internet connection and you can do full agentic coding on your own computer without spending any money or subscribing to any platform, just by having the right model and configuring your environment properly. So in this video, I'm going to give you a tutorial on exactly how to do that. We're going to talk about model selection, how local models actually work, and more importantly, how you can configure them and set them up to do agentic coding. It's one thing to get a local model on your computer, it's another to get it working inside of a coding environment so that it can actually execute tasks, write files, write code, do bash commands. You get the idea. So with all of that said, let's get started. So I just want to spend 30 seconds here talking about how a local model works, and then we're going to get into model selection, which is super important. So whenever you're doing agentic coding, you're essentially just using someone else's computer for your autocomplete or for your, agent tasks or code generation or whatever. Now that other computer that you're using is extremely powerful. Typically it has like a terabyte of RAM, a bunch of graphics cards, and it can run really powerful models. Then you can just essentially call that computer and get the response back. Now when you're using a local model, everything's on your own computer. So you're not calling out on the internet, you're not going to some kind of server, and more importantly, you're not paying for any compute. If I'm using Cursor or I'm using Claude Code, I'm using Cursor's model and I'm paying their fees. If I'm using Claude Code, I'm using Anthropic's model and I'm paying their fees. If I'm using a local model, I'm just running it on my own machine and it doesn't cost me anything. So I can run this, an infinite amount of time and there's no cost whatsoever. It's just going to be using my own hardware. Now that means that the type of model you can run is fully dependent on what type of hardware you have. And we're not yet capable of running, Opus level models on our own computer, but we can run ones that are pretty good, that are close to maybe like a Sonnet or a Haiku. And depending on the type of computer you have, obviously your kind of mileage and performance is going to vary. So keep that in mind. If you're on a really old computer, this video is probably not going to be that useful. But if you're on a newer computer, if you have a high-end graphics card, you're going to see that you can get some really good performance to the point where you can actually just use this fully all the time and only go to a high-end model if you really need something complex done. Okay, so with that said, let's talk about selecting the model because that's super important. And then after we do the selection, we'll go into all of the setup. So in terms of selecting the model, the type, or more importantly, the size of the model that you can run is going to be dictated by pretty much one number. And that's your video memory or your video RAM, okay? Otherwise known as VRAM. Now, in order to find that number, it really depends what operating system you're on. So if you're on a Windows computer, you hopefully know the hardware that you're running. If not, you should be able to locate that relatively quickly. I believe you can go to your task manager and you should be able to see what your graphics card is. And that graphics card is going to have a certain amount of VRAM. So if you're running an NVIDIA GPU, for example, maybe you're running a 4090 or a 5090 or a 3060 Ti or whatever the value is, just figure out what the VRAM is, the amount of video memory. For most modern graphics cards, you're going to be looking at 8 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, sometimes 24 gigabytes, depending on the model and of course, how expensive it was and what you paid for. Now that number is effectively going to dictate the maximum size of model that you can run on your computer. I'll talk more about that later, but if you have a 16 gigabyte VRAM graphics card, you can effectively run a model that's up to 16 gigabytes in size. Should be a little bit smaller, but about that size. If we talk about Mac, things change a little bit because on Mac, especially the newer Macs, any M series Mac, you have something called unified memory. Now what that means is that the RAM on your computer, so in my case I have an M5 Max with 64 gigabytes of RAM, is actually shared between the CPU and the GPU. So I have 64 gigabytes of RAM, just normal unified memory on my Mac computer, and that technically means that my GPU could use up to 64 gigabytes of video memory or of this unified memory. So if you're on Windows, you're looking specifically at your graphics card and how much VRAM is there. If you're on Mac, you're looking at how much unified memory you have. And if you want to find this on Mac, it's really easy. You can go to the Apple icon, you can go to About This Mac and just look for memory here. And you can see that I have 64 gigs. Now this is only going to be applicable on the M series Mac. If you're running an Intel Mac, then you're going to want to look at how much VRAM is on the integrated graphics card that's on your computer. But if you're on an Intel Mac, then this video is probably not going to work that very well for you, and you're only going to be able to run really kind of local models because those are just very old machines at this point. Now, one thing to be aware of is that while you have unified memory and it technically all could be used by the GPU, in theory, it's not all accessible. There's some memory that's required to run the operating system, other processes that you have. So while you might have 64 gigabytes of RAM like me, maybe only 55 gigabytes of that can actually be used to run the model. So essentially just figure out, okay, how much memory do I have? How much VRAM do I have on Windows? And how much unified memory do I have on Mac? And then we're going to subtract about 10 to 15% of that. And that's about the maximum size model that we'll be able to run with decent performance. Okay, now you can actually see I made a slide for this, and effectively on Mac, yeah, 75 to 80% of your unified memory is probably usable. And if you're on Windows, you can use effectively all of it because you have all of that RAM specifically for the GPU. It's not shared like it is on a Mac. Now, one thing to note is that if you are running on a Windows computer, your memory throughput is going to be a lot faster than on a Mac computer. So for example, if we look at an RTX 4090, we have 1008 gigabytes per second in terms of the speed of the memory. If we're looking at M4 Max, we have 546 gigabytes per second. Don't worry too much about this, but this is effectively the speed at which the memory can read and write data. So while you might be able to load a bigger model on Mac, having a dedicated GPU, especially a high-end GPU, usually you're going to get more tokens per second or a faster response from the model because it's just faster. Okay, so there's a difference between speed and kind of capability, and just because a model is bigger doesn't necessarily mean it's better, and same thing, just because it's smaller doesn't mean it's worse. The speed also is factored in based on the hardware that you're using. So with Mac, you can have bigger models generally, but if you have a dedicated GPU, while the models you can load are typically a little bit smaller, they're going to be a lot faster because the memory bandwidth is typically quicker. Okay. So let's keep going, and let's just quickly go through kind of a cheat sheet of what the size model you'll be able to run based on the computer that you're on. So models have a number of parameters, and you're going to see this advertised when you start looking at them. You'll see 7 billion, 14 billion, 32 billion, 70 billion, 480 billion, and the number of parameters will dictate the size of the model. So typically speaking, if you have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, you can run a 7 billion parameter model. If you have 12 to 16 gigs, you should be able to run a 14 billion one. If you have 24 gigs, you should be able to run a 32 billion one. And if you have 64 gigs or more, you should be able to run a 70 billion model. Now, this is not always the case, and we're going to look at this later, but this is kind of a general guideline for the size of the model that you can run. And some models will be smaller or larger with the same number of parameters based on kind of how they're tuned, the quantization, which we'll look at later. I'm just trying to give you a high level understanding because the model selection is by far the most important part. Okay, now let's just quickly have a look at what model you should be running based on the hardware tier that you have. Now, if you want to look for models, you can go to Hugging Face. Hugging Face has a ton of different models that you can scroll through here. You can filter and you can find all different types of models that you can run on your machine. But these are the ones that I'm going to recommend. If you follow along with this, it's just going to be super easy because I've tested a lot of these different models. Now, usually we're going to use 2 models when we're setting up kind of local development. We're going to have one really small, really fast model, which we use for autocomplete if we're actually going to be typing and getting autocomplete from code. And then we're going to use one much larger, more capable model, which is what's going to be used for chatting, editing, agentic mode, whatever. So you're going to have 2 different models. For most of us, we're just going to be using this Gwen 2.5 coder with 1.5 billion parameters for our autocomplete model. Pretty much any computer that you have is going to be capable of running this model, even if you don't have a graphics card. But if you don't have a graphics card, it's going to be fairly slow. So anyways, for autocomplete, that's pretty much just what we're going to use. And then for our chat and edit model, this is really going to depend on the amount of VRAM that you have. Now, there's a family of models that are very good for running locally and doing agentic coding, and it's the Gwen family of models. So you'll see Gwen 2.5, Gwen 3.6, Gwen 3.5, Gwen Coder next, okay? So there's a bunch of different models with different sizes. We'll look at them here in a second. But for example, if you're running on a 16 gigabyte unified memory laptop with Apple or 8 gigabytes of VRAM for a normal PC, you should be able to run this Gwen 2.5 coder with 7 billion parameters. Not a ton of parameters. It's going to take up a few gigabytes of space. Should be possible to run and run with decent performance. Next, if we go up in performance here and we have 24 to 32 gigabytes of RAM on Apple or 12 to 16 on a dedicated GPU, we should be able to run this 14 billion parameter model or this 30 billion parameter Gwen 3 coder model. Okay, so again, I'm just putting a cheat sheet here so you guys can see them later. If we have more than 24 gigabytes of VRAM or we're on a really high-end machine like I am, you should be able to run this Gwen 3 coder model. If we keep going, you should be able to run the Gwen 3 coder next model if you have 64 gigabytes. or more of memory. And then if you don't have any GPU at all, you're going to use the same model that you use for autocomplete as your main completion model, which is Gwen 2.5 coder with 1.5 to 3 billion parameters. Again, we'll look at this in a minute. I'll go into it in more detail, but I'm just giving you a quick cheat sheet. And I made even a larger table here with exact models in terms of GPUs and max specs, just a few of them that are pretty common. So you can see which model I would recommend, okay? So have a quick look at this, see if any of this applies to you. And now we're gonna get into the actual setup. We'll look at a few models specifically, and this will start to make a little bit more sense. And one last thing to be aware of, while you can run any of these models on your computer, assuming you have enough hard drive space, they're really only going to be efficient to run if they fit into the amount of VRAM that you have. So this is why I focus so much on the VRAM. If a model is 10 gigabytes, but you only have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, the model can still be loaded and it can still run on your computer, but the overflowing amounts, like you have 8 gigabytes in VRAM, the other 2 gigabytes is going to go in your normal system memory, or maybe even on the disk, depending on kind of how things are loaded, which is going to make it like 100 times slower than if it was fully loaded in your video memory. So pretty much just only run models that are smaller than the amount of VRAM that you have if you want them to run in any reasonable amount of time. Again, you can always run these models, but they can just be extremely slow if you can't load them in your VRAM. Okay, so we're gonna keep going and get into the setup, but one thing I wanna make you aware of is that this presentation is available from the link in the description in case you wanna check it out for yourself. And you'll notice that I actually have it deployed to this here.now domain. Now, here.now is actually a long-term partner of the channel. They are completely free to use, and they are a way that you can deploy sites really easily, especially for demo purposes, by literally just copying one single prompt. Let me show you what I mean. If you just go to here.now, I'll leave a link to it in the description, you can copy their agent instructions. And this is actually exactly what I did when I was building this presentation using Claude Code. You could just paste the instructions here and say, hey, I want you to set up here.now and I want you to deploy this site. And you literally just paste it inside of here. I already did this, so you can see it does it. And it will just deploy this to a website for you automatically. So you see it deployed to this site that I was loading, right? You guys can now view it. And then if you want to claim the site and have it be available for more than 24 hours, you just need to create a free account and sign in just so you can save the site to a particular account. You can see if I go to my dashboard here, I have a bunch of sites that have already been deployed. This is completely free. You don't need to pay for anything. You actually don't even need to make an account unless you want to claim the site. And then of course, if you do want to upgrade, you can pay $4 per month, $20 per month if you want more sites, a bunch of storage, but I haven't had to do that yet, and I use this a ton. Anyways, massive shout out to here.now for sponsoring this video and providing this service because I use it all the time and I genuinely think it is great. And with that said, let's go to the next part of the video. Okay, so now that we have kind of a basis and understanding, we can start actually setting this up. Now, there's two pieces of software we're going to use in this video. The first is LM Studio. The second is Visual Studio Code. So download both of these if you want to follow along exactly. You can use other code editors as well, but VS Code recently added a feature that makes it really easy to run these local models. So I'm going to suggest that you go with that, and it's just kind of the best experience for local model development. Trust me, I have tried a lot. Okay, so download Visual Studio Code, download LM Studio. Again, both these are free. You don't need to pay for anything. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna open LM Studio, and I'm just gonna walk you through kind of the basic user interface here. Now, LM Studio allows you to download and manage with some more precision than something like Ollama local models. Now, what you can do is you can go to the chat, which is kind of in the top left-hand corner here. You can go to the developer view, which allows you to run a server, which we're gonna look at in a second. And you can go to the model view, which is what we're gonna wanna go on here, where we can search for models and we can see our current LLMs. Now you can see I have some downloaded. And then what we're gonna wanna do is go to, this last button here, kind of the robot button, where we can start searching for the LLM that we want to download and use. Now, if you're unsure which one to use, feel free to ask Claude Code, look at my presentation, or just copy exactly what I use in this video. Again, really depends on the amount of VRAM that you have. So in my situation, I have 64 gigabytes of RAM on this computer. I'm using an M5 Max, very high-end machine, which means I can run some pretty powerful models. Now, the models that I'm going to be running in this video are going to be the Gwen 3.6 35 billion parameter model and the Gwen 3 Coder Next model. Now, I'm going to talk to you about how I decided to pick these, and then I'll go through a few smaller ones that you can use because I know a lot of you don't have the same level of hardware that I do. So the reason that I decided to pick these models is, first of all, their capabilities. Now, when you're looking at models, you want to make sure that they have the ability to do tool use, okay? So this is going to be for your main chat model, okay? The autocomplete one is basic. For the main chat and edit model, it needs to have tool use. If it doesn't have tool use, it's not going to be able to actually call the tools to create the files. It's just going to be able to give you a chat response. So yeah, it can tell you, what the code is, but it can't actually edit it, modify it, which is what makes these useful. So first of all, you need tool use, right? Okay. Now, for this one here, the reason I picked it is because it's 22 gigabytes. So I know for sure I can load it in my VRAM because I have 64 gigabytes of RAM, and I'm using this Q4 version, which is what's called quantization. Now, effectively, when you pick these models, you can have the entire model, okay, which is all of the parameters, nothing shorted, nothing fine-tuned, whatever, which is going to be quite large. In this case, it's 37 gigabytes for the 35 billion parameter model. We have Q6, which is just a smaller, more condensed version of this. And then we have Q4, which is an even smaller version of this. You have different levels of what's called quantization. Effectively, you lose a tiny bit of performance, but it shrinks the size of the model drastically. So it's almost always best to just go with kind of the lowest quantization version of the model that you're capable of running on your machine. And this is also going to make the model a lot faster. The smaller the model is, the faster it's going to run. So I decided to go with this one because I'm like, okay, 35 billion parameters, that's a lot. It's still super capable. It has tool use. It's going to easily fit in my memory, and it's going to run relatively quickly rather than me trying to run a super powerful, really big model that's going to be a lot slower. And I'll show this to you in a second, okay? So that's one model that's a great choice. Another one is the Gwen 3 Coder Next. Now this is a much larger model. I'm going to show it to you in a second. It's about 44 gigabytes on my computer. But the reason I picked it again is because it has tool use and because this is kind of one of the state-of-the-art local models that you can be running. And fortunately, it just fits on my machine. I tested both Gwen 3 Coder Next and this 35 billion parameter Gwen 3.6 on my machine. Both work really well. This one is just quite a bit slower, so typically I prefer to use this Gwen 3.6. Okay, now that's for me, right? Because I'm running a pretty high-end machine. For most of you, you're probably going to want to look at the Gwen 3.6 14 billion parameter model, okay? So you can scroll through here, you'll see that there's this 14 billion parameter model with this A3B. What A3B stands for is active 3 billion parameters. Don't worry too much about that, but effectively it means that what's actually going to be running on your graphics card is a smaller number of parameters than the full size of the model, which allows you to run larger models on worse hardware. So if you see these A3B, A6B, A9B, whatever, that's saying the number of active parameters, and that means the model's typically going to be more performant on your machine, even if it's a little bit larger. So if you look through the options here, you can see that there's a Q4, a Q3, a Q2. So depending on, again, the amount of VRAM that you have, pick the quantization and try to pick something that is maybe like 50, 60% of the VRAM that you have, so it runs pretty quickly. So for most of you, if you have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, you should be able to run this model no problem on your machine. There's a few other ones, like there's a DeepSeek model that's capable of being ran. You can see this one is pretty small. We're looking at like, 4, 6, whatever gigabytes with 8 billion parameters. So have a look, do some research, see which one you want to try to run. The Gemma 4 models are also pretty good. They're very new, but they're not as good at coding. And then again, the Gwen ones are the ones that I would probably recommend to pick. I know I'm rambling a lot, but I'm trying to give you as much info as I can because this model selection is really going to dictate the performance, and you're probably going to want to play around with a few of them and see the best results that you get. Okay. So that is for just downloading your main kind of chat model. Once you find the one you want, download it, wait for it to download, and then make sure that we get our autocomplete model. The one we're all probably going to want here is the Gwen Coder Next 2.5 with 1.5 billion parameters. I'm typing it incorrectly, but if we scroll through here, we should be able to find it. Okay, let me just find it from here. What is it called? It is, let's see, my LLMs. Let's make this a little bit larger. Okay, Gwen 2.5 coder, 1.5 billion instruct. I just downloaded the largest version of it because I have a really high-end machine, but you can download the smaller version, which is 900 megabytes. Okay, so these are the models that we want. Now, once we have these models, if we just want to test them and make sure they're working, we can just go to the chat window here. We can select the model from the top of the screen. So we can go, Gwen 3.6, and we can adjust a bunch of settings for this model. Now, what we're going to want to do is just make sure that our GPU offload is as high as possible. We're going to set the context length. So the more that you set this, so you can see it goes up to 262,000 tokens here. Obviously, the more room it's going to take up on your computer, because this also needs to be loaded in memory. And you can see at the top that it shows you the amount of memory that's going to be used here as you scroll through and set the context. So you can check versus your VRAM to see what you should set this at. There's a bunch of other settings that you don't really need to go through. You just want to make sure GPU offload is as high as possible so it uses the full GPU, and then you set the context length. Then you can load this model. It's going to take a second to load. You can see that at the top. And then you can start chatting with it just to make sure it's working. And you should see that you start getting tokens outputted. Now you can see for me, I was getting 100 tokens per second. That's quite fast. And you're not going to feel like it's a slow model if you're running more than like 50, 60 tokens per second. But you can again play with it and see what speed you're getting. Let's quickly change over to the Gwen 3 coder next. And you're going to see that in some situations, it's going to tell you, hey, like you cannot load this model. It's going to take up too much room on your computer. I found that this is pretty aggressive and that most of the times the model will actually load. So if it's giving you this issue, don't worry about that too much. Feel free just to crank up the context. I'm going to go here and just press load anyways, and just wait and see if it loads. If it loads, you should be good to go. Then you can go ahead and use it and see the performance that you're actually getting. Keep in mind that if you're on Mac, if you have a lot of other things open, you're probably going to want to close those when you're doing this so that your memory's freed up so that you can do this. So now we've switched the model. Let me just go hello. And now you can see we're using Gwen 3 coder next. I believe this should work. And let's see if we get a response. Okay, now it did give me a response here, but this one took 25 seconds, even though we had 82 tokens per second. So sometimes on Mac, if your other processes are using the memory, you're gonna have a delay and it's kind of fighting for the space. I believe because I'm screen recording right now, I'm just at that limit where I'm not able to run this efficiently. So for this video, I'll just use the Gwen, 3.635 billion parameter model, but you guys get the idea, okay? So just test them, make sure they work, and then what we're gonna do is go over here to this developer section. Now from this developer section, what we need to do, I'm just going to eject this for right now, is we need to preload the models that we actually want to use when we're coding. We're going to need to do this every time that we're setting up coding, and we're going to need to start this development server. Now starting this development server is going to expose these models to our local machine, which means VS Code will be able to use them, and then we can see all of the logs and everything that's going on in here. So I'm just going to turn on the server, and then we're going to go load model, and we're going to load our autocomplete model, and we're going to load the chat model that we're using. So I'm going to use Gwen 3.6, right, like I said, so I'm going to load that up here. You can change the settings again, make sure GPU offload is as high as possible, and then adjust the context based on how much memory you have here. And you're going to have to play with these settings a little bit to see what works best for you. So that's loading. While it's loading, we're going to load the autocomplete model as well. Same thing, I'll just set the context really large, even though we probably don't need that much. Let's set the GPU offload and then just load this up. And then both of these are now ready. Okay, so both of these models are now loaded, meaning they'll be accessible when we start using them from VS Code. And the next step is to set this up in VS Code. So in order to set this up in VS Code, first of all, make sure you have the newest version. If you have the newest version of VS Code, they have a feature that allows you, without signing in or being connected to the internet, to manage local models. So first thing I did here is I just went to File, Open Folder. I just opened a new folder on my desktop, so you can just make a new folder and open it just so you're inside of some kind of project. And then what you're going to do is open what's called the command palette. So you're going to hit Control, Shift, and then P on your keyboard, or Command, Shift, P if you're on Mac. This is going to open what's called the command palette. From here, you're going to type manage, and you're going to look for manage, it's like models or something. Yeah, manage language models, okay? This is the new feature that they've added like a week ago or something. Now from here, what we can do is simply press on add models. When we press on add models, we're going to go custom endpoint. And from custom endpoint, we're just going to give this a name. So the name, you can just call this LM Studio. I already have one called LM Studio, so I'm just going to call it LM Studio 2. Doesn't really matter. This is just what's going to show up in the list. So we're going to press that. For the API key, just put any random values in. You just need something. So just put random string and hit enter. And then we're going to go with chat completions. Okay, so select chat completions. And then what you're going to see is that it opens up this config file for you. Now in this config file, what we need to do is just fill in 3 values here: the ID, name, and URL. It's super basic. What we're going to do is we're going to copy this URL right here. It'll be the same that I'm typing in, so you can just copy it from what you see me typing, but it's also available here in LM Studio. And this is the URL to the LM Studio, API. Okay, so we're going to paste that URL. And then for the ID, we're going to select the ID of the model that we want to use. Now the ID is available right here in LM Studio, so you can just press this copy button and it will directly copy it for you and just paste that ID. And then for the name, you just put the exact same thing. Okay, now you'll see that for the capabilities, it shows tool calling and then vision. You only want to select vision if vision is a capability of the model. For Gwen 3.6, it is, so we'll just leave vision as true. And then you can adjust the max input and output tokens. So in my case, I believe we can see the context of this. Yeah, it's this, so I'm just going to copy this number here and adjust the max input tokens. And then for the output tokens, you can set out whatever you want. I'm going to crank this up to 64,000. Okay, so what this has now done is it simply added a model. And if we want to test if this is working, let me just delete my other settings here so that we don't mess anything up. We can just save by hitting Control S on the keyboard and then exit out of this. And in order to see if this is working, what we'll do again is go Command Shift P or Control Shift P. So open up the command palette again. Same thing, manage language models. And we're just going to see if this model is appearing. And you can see that it is. It says Gwen 3.6, 35B, A3B. Now, if we want to adjust this, we can press this button right here, which is opening the language models JSON. So it's going to bring us right back here. And then we can add another model as well. So I'm just going to add my next model. The way I can do that is just copy this and put it inside of LM Studio here. So notice there's this kind of models array. For this next one, I'm just going to say vision is false. Okay, and for the max input tokens, we're going to adjust this. It's going to be a lot smaller. We're just going to go like 32,000. And then for the ID name and the URL, we can put the autocomplete model. So I'm just going to copy this, okay, and just change the model here for our autocomplete. Okay, cool. Go ahead, and now we've added that, and we have this other model added as well. Although for the autocomplete, we're going to have to do something a little bit different, which I'll show you in a second. But this is how you can add multiple models in case you want to switch between them. So now that we have this, what we want to do is we want to open the chat window in VS Code. So to get to chat, I believe you can toggle it from the top somehow, or you can hit Control L or Command L on your keyboard. Now you just want to go into this chat window. Should be open by default. I believe you can also go View, Appearance. You should be able to find chat somewhere. I don't know exactly how you open it usually in VS Code. Here you go, chat. In the setting, it should open it up. That just unopened it, of course, because it was already open. But from chat, we can make a new chat, and then we should be able to select our model. So if we go to select model and we go to other models, we should see the models we've added. So we have this Gwen 3.6 model, and then we can say something like, hey, can you make me a game of chess using JavaScript and React? Okay, go ahead and press enter. By the way, you guys always ask me what I'm using to dictate here. It's a really cool tool called Whisper Flow. I'm an absolute power user of the tool. You can see I have over 133,000 words. It's free to use. It's the best AI voice dictation. It works right inside of these code editors. You can also like directly tag files, and I have a long-term partnership with them. So if you guys want to download it and support me, I have a link below that you can use. Again, totally free, and then you can upgrade if you want to get more limits, whatever, all the features that they have. Okay, cool. So you can see this is now working, right? It's functioning. It's actually using the model, although it seems to be a little bit slow. And if I go here, you can now see in LM Studio that it's generating tokens. And if we go to this developer logs at the bottom of the screen here, you'll be able to see all of the requests that are being sent back and forth, the speed, what's going on, the responses, any errors, and we've set this up. And now we have functioning local models inside of Visual Studio Code, which is super cool. So it's going to take a second here to do this. My fan is now spinning up on my computer, and my performance is going to be a little bit degraded because I am recording my screen, so it might be a little bit laggy here for you guys. But overall, this should function. I'll wait for it to finish, then we'll come right back and see if this is working. Okay, so it actually just completed the game here. Now, there was a little bit of a glitch where it was trying to access like an integrated browser, which didn't work, and it gave me some bug, but it's now functioning. It's created this huge index file, this script.js, which is like 600 lines, the style.css, and while it didn't make it in React like I asked for, it did make the fully functioning game. And now if I want to just open this, let's just test it out and see if this actually works. Okay, so clearly there's some bug or something in the chess game because it's not loading, but the point is it did some coding. So, you know, I'm gonna have to debug that, and maybe I should have given it a simpler task to begin, but it is working. Okay, so that's how you set up the chat, right? And this now is gonna allow us to do agentic coding. We can change the mode, ask, agent, plan, whatever, set up different agents, test them, see which one is gonna work. We can tag different files and just use this like we would use any agentic code editor. However, if we want autocomplete to function locally as well, so if we don't have any internet, that this will work, what we can do is install an extension in VS Code, and this extension is called Continue. So to install the extension, you can go to this little puzzle piece icon here. You can search for Continue. You can open this up, and Continue essentially will do the same thing that we've already done inside of VS Code, but it will just allow us to set the autocomplete, which is, I don't believe, a native setting right now in VS Code. So you can install Continue. There should be a button here that says Install. And once you install that, you should see an icon on the bottom left-hand side of your screen that looks, sorry, that's not what I meant to type, looks something like, let me just put it here, like this, okay? It should show this weird kind of hexagonal thing. And now this is going to open up essentially a chat window, which is a clone of what we just saw in VS Code. So what we can do is we can configure models inside of this Continue extension. They're going to work the same way that they would work natively in VS Code, and we can configure the autocomplete. So what I'm going to do is just use Continue to configure the autocomplete, but you also could just fully use this configuration for everything else as well. So I know it might be a little bit confusing. Let me just show you what I mean. What we're going to do is go to Settings here. From Settings, if we go to Models, you should see that it says like Setup Model, or it should show you some default option or something. What we can do is just simply press this Add button. We can change the provider to say LM Studio. And then for the model, we can just pick anything random. It doesn't have to be the one that we actually installed. If it's there, obviously select it, but if not, just pick anything and just press Connect. From here, it's going to bring you to this config file, and at the bottom, it's going to have this kind of connected model, which is the one that you just added. What we want to do here is we just want to change this model, so what it shows right here, to be the name of the model that we have in LM Studio. So what I can do is just select this right here, the Gwen 2.5 coder. I can change the model like that, and now it's good, and we've simply just added this, and then of course we can change the name, Gwen 2.5 coder. However, if we want this to work for autocomplete, let me just delete this because I'm going to show you a finished version. We need to, one second here, let me get rid of this, add the role. Okay, so roles is just an array here that says autocomplete. So effectively what you can do is just copy what I have here if you use the same model, put the name, put the provider, the model, the API base, which is just this, which will already be there, and then the roles dash autocomplete. Once you add that, you can just save this file, Control S. And if you come back here now, you can set this autocomplete model. And if you set this autocomplete model, now when you're typing inside of VS Code, it's going to use that for the automatic completions. For the chat, you can also add your own chat model here, and then just make sure that you add these roles and capabilities like I have here. Chat, edit, apply, and then tool use. Again, you can just literally copy the configuration that I have, and then that will work in this chat window in the Continue extension. I kind of prefer to use the default chat in VS Code. I find it works a little bit better and it edits the files better. I'm just showing you this because this is how we set the autocomplete. But if you want to use this chat window, you can, and you can mess with it and see, okay? So now if I go to like index.html, actually let's go to script, and let's just write like if or something. You should see that we start getting some autocomplete. Let's just go like console.error, okay, whatever. And if I go back to LM Studio and I click into the coder model, we should see that we're getting some tokens streamed. And regardless, it should be working in that LM Studio view. Sometimes you need to restart VS Code in order for it to work, but for me, that's pretty much all I did. And now the autocomplete is functioning. And again, you can go settings, there's a bunch of other stuff that you can adjust and change here. Overall, I don't change anything there. I just set the autocomplete model, set the chat model stuff, and we are pretty much good to go. And that is going to complete the setup. I mean, that gives you the autocomplete model, that gives you the chat, the edit, whatever, and now you can just do full local coding on your machine. Now again, the results are going to vary here. This is not as good as Opus. It's not as good as using these cloud providers. But if you're on a plane and you need to use this for a few hours, if you're out of credits and you want to do something small, if you're doing, smaller inline edits, creating some functions, not trying to do like super complex prompts, this works and it works pretty well. Now later I will do a video going through the performance of these local models and talk about that more in depth. But generally speaking, I just wanted to show you guys how to set this up. If you found this useful, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in another video.